So in this video, I'm gonna be talking about Suzuki Book 1. It's gonna be a little bit from obviously from a beginner's perspective. I've been playing for 2 months nonstop, and I'm taking it very slow. So I don't know if you watched the last video, but I played for a year and a half. I took private lessons. Um, and I just couldn't afford them anymore. So here I am, trying to get back to it. But this time I took my approach very different to address a lot of the weaknesses. And one of them was that even when I was in Suzuki Book 3, I was about halfway through it. I still couldn't play some of the pieces in this one at tempo. And when I was sort of organizing my thoughts on how I would restart Suzuki Book 1, I had another book before Essential Elements Book 1 that's essentially just theory, so I can learn how to read the music with the corresponding notes on the strings and not the fingerings, because that just did not work for me. I felt like even in Book 3, and if I went back to Book 1, specifically in the Happy Farmer, I would still struggle. I would still struggle to play this piece, even though I was all the way in Suzuki Book 3. So a good examples of pieces that I still could not play at tempo were Perpetual Motion in D major, including it's. But now obviously I could play it, but not at tempo and not the variation down right here. The variation, which is the double notes with the same timing. It just, I remember I would practice and then I would get to it and then I would just kind of like, okay, whatever, I can't do it. And this goes for, actually, this goes for Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as well. Because if you, so this one also has double notes as well. And I would just skip to it, honestly. But the biggest example of this was that I could not play, and actually my teacher never even had me play the variation. So when I would go home and then they would pop up, I would just try for like 2 seconds, be like, oh, it's just too advanced for me. Is the etude, including the variation. I could play this, put it very slowly, and so one of my goals when I started this book was I need to know how to read sheet music, which by the time I think I took like about a week or two studying that theory book for bass clef for beginners, level one. And let me tell you, it only took me about 2 weeks. And I actually went back. I think I had extra copies of some of these, and I penciled in the notes on top as like study to reinforce it on the page now, instead of just having it in that book. Now I want to be able to look at the sheet music and be able to actually read it. How do I say it? I just realized that I'm probably recording myself on here. Who cares? I know you can see the OBS. Who cares? So yeah, think about that. I'm over here. So this time I was gonna take my sweet ass time. I said to myself, I am not moving on until I can play every single piece in Suzuki Book 1 on at tempo. And I'll tell you why I came to that conclusion. I started looking up how Suzuki is meant to be taught, because it's typically meant for kids. Let me drink some coffee. All right. And when the kids do the recital, some will do one piece, some will do the entire book and memorized. And it's not perfect. Some of them obviously are geniuses on YouTube and they play it perfect. But some of these kids, obviously, even from my ear, I could hear that it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for a recital and it was memorized. Now, as obviously I'm an adult, I don't have time to memorize all these. I am trying to progress. I'm not 4 years old or 10 years old. So I was like, memorizing, I'm not going to do that. But I am gonna learn to play them at tempo before I move on to another book. And at that point, I had not decided if I was gonna do Essential Elements Book One because people were saying that, oh, it's just it's like a it's it but essentially Essential Elements Book One and Two are this, and it's not true. I 100% disagree. They're just very different. Okay, so this is not a combination of those two books. In fact, some things in those two books is more advanced than what you see in one this book alone. For example, slurs, and I went over that in the other book. And I can honestly tell you that by the time I finish this book, so I still use perpetual motion as a warm up, the etude, including the double notes, um, and the Happy Farmer. Although I don't need to play that one as much anymore, but and especially Minuet number two because I don't know if anyone has tried to play Minuet number two on tempo. It's probably the hardest one, and I can play it at tempo now. It's not perfect. It gets cleaner and cleaner every time I practice it on my warm up. Obviously, some days are messier when I'm tired. I don't feel like practicing. It sounds like shit. But then on other days, I'm like, whoa. One of the things I was shocked about when I finished this book, like this in this way, where I wasn't rushing to get to where I used to be. Like, yes, when I was taking lessons, I was all the way in book three, and it was like, ooh. And now I'm just like, no, I'm gonna take my time because I'm dead serious about learning this time, and I don't want to stop. And I've done hobbies before where I start them, and let me tell you, it's been 3 years and I'm still doing them. So I know what it feels like to start something, and I have the attitude where I'm not stopping this time. I would have to, I don't know, something drastic would have to happen to me where I would stop playing, right? Um, so my review of this is honestly, I highly recommend it. But I would as if you're an adult beginner like myself, and you're not taking lessons. I'm not taking lessons right now, by the way. I still think you should try to get at least one or two lessons, maybe one per month, whatever you can afford. Right? Communicate that to whoever you're hiring. Remember, you are hiring them; they're working for you, so you have to vocalize what is it that you want. And if you can't afford more than one lesson, just be like, hey, this is what I want. I think you want to focus more on technique, hand, bow, wait, bow, hand, posture, and your hand when you go to these lessons, if you do, because everything else comes. You will learn it. You can learn it on your own through videos, but these things are harder to correct when you're on your own. So always try to be looking at posture, at hand, at your always assume that you could do it better. Never assume that you're doing it right. Because once you assume you're doing it perfectly, that's when things get sloppy. But if you're always assuming you could do it better, you're always going to be looking at how to correct it. For example, when I was originally taking lessons, for whatever reason, my thumb, I had it flat. Let me see if I can get it flat. And it never bothered me. But in this time around, my practice sessions were far longer. So I started to notice by the end of this book that I was putting way too much pressure on my thumb, and it was starting to hurt. And I'm like, I think I'm doing something wrong. I found this video by this older gentleman who was a teacher, and he's passed away now. Everybody's saying rest in peace in the comments. And hold on one sec. All right, I had to cut the video there, but so as far as for negatives, they're not really negatives. They're more like things that it's lacking. It's I think for an adult, relying on the numbers is not a good thing. I think you should study the theory either through another. It doesn't have to be essential elements. It could be another book that handles that kind of thing, whichever one you decide on. But I do think that this is good if you just want to get into playing and sound honestly like you're actually playing music. But the numberings, do not rely on them long term. At least for me, it just didn't work. The fact that I was in Suzuki Book 3 and I couldn't even play some of these pieces at tempo goes to show you that also take your time. Play them at tempo at least and make them sound decently enough before you move on. So after this book, I wait, was there anything else I wanted to say about this? Oh, I guess it's not a negative, but it doesn't have the exercises that I liked about, that I also liked slash disliked about Essential Elements Book 1. Is that once I got through them, I genuinely feel like I got better by playing through the exercises laid out in Essential Elements Book 1. It felt like the entire book was structured to build up to the last piece. On a positive note, but one thing this book does do different that even Essential Elements doesn't do is the focus on sound and the intonation of, especially on how to find your fourth finger placement and your first finger placement. And they do have a few exercises like that. They're more related to sound versus movements and bowing patterns. And I think that's where they're a little different, where this one has a far more focus on listening to that. And that's one thing I'm going to touch on real quick. So when I was fixing my thumb, right, because I was feeling that pressure, is once I fixed it and hold on, and I lowered it, it took me about 2 weeks where I felt like I was playing all the notes a little off, and it's hard to explain. I had to essentially relearn the shape of my hand, but once I was able to do that, I was able to more accurately find my place. But here's another thing: I had heard this cello teacher on YouTube, and they were talking about how when she knows when students have learned with tape because they constantly do this. They're looking at the neck of, you know what, this might be an issue. They're looking at the neck of the cello. And I didn't learn with tape. I learned with pencil markings so that they fade away. And I think after 2 or 3 months, I just let them erase. But I noticed that I was looking without even realize that I was looking. And I asked myself, why am I looking? What am I looking for? And honestly, I don't know. But I'm looking to see if I can gauge the height of my hand. But it's like I genuinely don't know visually, but yet I had that same habit. And once she pointed that out, I started to use the open string next to it with the fourth finger down to find my position. And once I started doing it, it only took within a day. I was finding my positions. If I ever felt like I was lost on the fingerboard, I could find my position so much faster. Um, so I started using my ears more. And this is where things like listening are a good thing. And so so that's why everything has its up and downs, right? But don't neglect your ear. Use your ear when you're finding notes. Don't look. If you ever find yourself doing this, stop it. Unless you're doing extensions, right? And extensions and right, then maybe. So I don't think this relates to this, but just I'm gonna throw this in there. I had an issue with extensions where a lot of people have a problem with it. I can't. Where they can't. It's hard to do it without the cello. Where they can't get to the note. I have a problem where I was overextending. So I had to, I had to kind of like force myself to not. Essentially, for me, it doesn't feel like I'm extending my hand. It just kind of feels like I'm just lowering the fingers a little bit. But I don't think that really matters. But the thumb is super important. It does matter because when you're extending, it really does help you find your place. Um, Honestly, I think that's pretty much it. Um, that's pretty much why I did restart with Suzuki Book 1 and I moved on to Essential Elements Book 1 and I'm going to come back to Suzuki Book 2 now. Oh, sorry. And then I moved on to Essential Elements Book 2 because of what I had heard that those two books combined, although it ended up being a good thing. I moved on to Essential Elements Book 2, which I'm working on the last piece, which was one of the most frustrating pieces I've ever learned so far, because the extensions in that piece are nothing like I've played in either Suzuki Book 1 or 2, and so far the ones that I remember learning in Book 3. In that piece, man, so yeah, that book will help you master extensions, because in order to play the last piece, you have to have them down, because that last piece is fast, and it's half of it is extensions. And by the way, essential elements, while it holds your hands, it also doesn't hold your hand. But I guess it's not really about that book. Getting ahead of myself. And then once I'm done with Essential Elements Book 2, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna come back to Suzuki Book 2, and then and I can't wait, because I have a memory of that book and I have not touched it other than playing the first piece while I was waiting for Essential Elements Book 2 to get in the mail. I did play the first one and it already sounded miles better than when I used to play it back in the day. So even though it's only been 2 months and I restarted, I have far surpassed a year and a half of practicing, where it felt more like, well, it is different because you're learning from scratch, but I'm also practicing a lot more this time around. And so yeah, it's very different, but still recommend it. And I'll say that's pretty much, I've just